Change Information Center, Agricultural Research Center in the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of Egypt. Ahlan wa salam, salam alaikum. Let me introduce myself. My name is Anjali Bamzai, and for 2 months I will be spending time at the CCIC as an Embassy Science Fellow. Egypt is preparing for a great event at Sharm el Sheikh in November, the COP27, and I hope that my efforts will make this event a success for Egypt. So I developed these seminar series, and the first speaker today is Dr. Alexander Ruane. He is a research physical scientist at NASA, Goddard Institute for Space Sciences. This is located in New York City, so we are grateful to Alex for getting up early. It is 7:30 a.m. New York time. So thank you, Alex, for joining us. Alex is the co-director of the GIS Climate Impacts Group, and he's also the associate research scientist at Columbia University Center for Climate System Research in New York City. And more importantly, he is the research coordinator and the climate team lead for a large international project called Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project, or AGMIP for short. And this project connects climate science, crop modeling, economic modeling. It places regional agricultural impacts of climate change into the global context and also examines uncertainties, vulnerability, food security issues, both for today and for the future. So the title of his talk today is Agricultural Modeling to Support Climate Adaptation and Resilience Planning. And now, before Alex starts, Dr. Mohammed Fahim, the head of CCIC, will provide some welcome remarks. And after that, Mr. Chafi, who is the economics officer at the US Embassy in Cairo, will also provide welcome remarks. After they have provided their welcome remarks, Alex will begin his presentation. Thank you again for joining us. Dr. Mohammed Fahim, please provide your remarks.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The voice is okay? The voice is okay, Ala?
Yes, Dr. Mohammed, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. Welcome in our center. It's a very good chance to introduce myself. For you, I'm Dr. Mohammed Ali Fahim, chair of the Center of Climate Change Information Center. A center belonging to the Ministry of Agriculture. It's my honor to welcome by Dr. Anjali. It's very pleasure to be here with our friends and colleagues in the center. Of course, we welcome and thank you very much, Jack, for your for all your sincere effort to support our center and support the climate action in Egypt. Really, it's very for me, it's very important chance to make like technology transfer to build the capacity of our researchers. The climate change is complicated. You know, it's not only the basic data or basic science. It's only the impact of climate change on the crop productivity and crop growth and on every biological event on the earth. So it's like complicated science. It's need to build the capacity of people here in Egypt because as I mentioned in morning, the impact of climate change on Egyptian agriculture is a silent impact. And the silent impact is a dangerous one because I don't uh, I don't have the methods or methodology to catch what is the problem. So again, thank you again. Back for all your sense of effort, and thank you, of course, for Dr. Angeli. It's our pleasure to be here with words. After a few weeks, you will speak Arabic as an Egyptian one. Thank you very much, and I hope all of people can participate and do the hard work with this one. Thank you again. Ala,
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed. Hi, Chuck. Can you start?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks, Dr. Mohammed, for the intro. It was a pleasure seeing you today at the CC. I hope I'll get back there very soon. And I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today for the first event in our speaker series about climate issues. Dr. Angeli has been working for many weeks to make this possible, reaching out to science experts all over America. And I think you're going to enjoy what's happening. So, and I'd also like to thank the Ministry of Agriculture and the Agricultural Research Center and CCIC for making her stay in Egypt possible. Working inside the every day. We're so honored to have Dr. Angeli here in Cairo as our science fellow. The science program is really used. It tackles tough problems that we want to solve together. And of course, there's no problem as tough as climate. So we will be very busy, and we hope to have a lot of ideas, and you'll learn a lot from each other. Dr. Angeli is one of the scientists in the U.S. government. And in her job at the National Science Foundation, she helps fund scientific research projects too that help to make a difference on climate. So not only can she help, answer and work on climate projects, we're hoping that she'll be able to find ways to find funding for you too. She's been involved in climate issues and negotiations for many, many years. And we're really excited for her to be working in Egypt as we get ready for the COP27. I have a little announcement today. We're very excited to say that the embassy is developing a special U.S. visit program based on the climate scientists. Dr. Alex, who's leading this lecture, helped develop our proposal. In fact, I think this may be the first time he's heard, but it was chosen by our higher committee at the embassy for the funding. So we're very excited to move ahead with that. In the coming weeks, we'll share more information about the program, which we're still working to design. We're hoping we can bring about 5 Egyptian scientists and experts to the United States for a few weeks to work with Dr. Alex in his project that improves the agricultural modeling, to visit different sites in the United States, and to get some training about his project too. The nice thing is that the embassy will pay for the whole program, including the travel and hotel costs. So we'll know more about that pretty soon. But for now, I'd just like to say thanks for joining our brief day, and we hope you make time again for amazing that Dr. Angeli is planning for you in the coming weeks. So thank you for your time, and we look forward to learning from doctors.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Now the floor is yours, Dr. Alex.
Right, thank you very much. It's always great to step up to a microphone after just hearing that a proposal was selected. So that's fantastic news, Chuck, and we're looking forward to more of this technological exchange. Today is a great opportunity for me to begin that conversation, especially thank Dr. Anjuli for helping us get together and making the connections that made this presentation possible, and the collaborations that I'm sure will develop from this all possible. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully everything will work on the technology side. So if somebody wants to verify that they can see the PowerPoint, that would be great. Is it turning out all right?
Yes, it is.
Great. All right, so my name is Dr. Alex Ruane. I am a climate scientist by training, but have been working for many years now on the science of climate applications, especially around agriculture. So today I'm going to be talking about agricultural modeling to support climate adaptation and resilience planning. And in doing this, I'm going to wear several different hats and tap into several different I'm involved in. First is that I was one of the coordinating lead authors for the IPCC Working Group 1, which was tasked with assessing the physical climate science of climate change. I'm also involved in the synthesis report, which takes all aspects of climate change, whether it's the physical impacts, the adaptation, the vulnerability, the economics, and the kind of mitigation policies that all come together in understanding how the climate challenge presents itself and what we might do about it. I'm also, as was mentioned, the co-director for the GIS Climate Impacts Group that works on agriculture and conservation, but also on cities. And we've worked in the past with Cairo and other places on, large climate challenges on an urban basis. But largely today I'm going to be talking about AgMIP, the Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project. And AgMIP is centered at Columbia University, which is also with NASA GIS in New York. So we are really excited to share what we've been doing and opportunities for more collaboration with Egyptian experts and stakeholders and policymakers. So the best way for me to begin this topic is by underscoring how tough of a challenge it is. In the next decades, the world is asking the agricultural sector to sustainably increase production to provide healthy food for growing and developing populations. While at the same time, the agricultural sector must adapt to climate change and ongoing climate extremes, while also mitigating emissions from agricultural lands and maintaining the overall financial incentives so that agriculture can continue as a way of life and as a cultural and economic engine. So any one of these challenges is substantial, but handling all of these challenges and the way that they interact is one big and complex problem. And this is what we're trying to get a hold of and trying to grapple with in our climate change approaches. So as an overview today, I'll talk about how we use agricultural modeling approaches to address these complex challenges, how we conduct models for a number of applications, what we've done already in North Africa and the Middle East, and some approaches that I think might be appealing around regional integrated assessments for risk and solutions planning. And then I'll end with some grander ambitions about how we might build an AgMIP Middle East and North Africa hub, and what we might be able to do with that type of community and technological infrastructure. So in terms of agricultural modeling to address complex challenges, let's start with the kind of basic question. What do we mean when we're talking about agricultural models? Well, here is kind of a representation of a farmer's field. And there are lots of things going on. This is a maize field and the broader field, but there are other things that we might try to represent. First of all, we are representing the plant and its own processes, but we might be looking also at things or diseases. We want to understand what's happening above ground as well as what's happening in the soils. We might be into carbon exchanges and other greenhouse gas exchanges. How does the water system and irrigation factor in, as well as machinery, the potential for air pollution, and other factors that are all affecting the plants, most importantly, the farmers themselves. Of course, we're also observing what happens in a field, if it's the weather, also using things like new technologies for remote sensing from drones and autonomous vehicles, as well as satellites and things that NASA can provide. So there's lots of perspectives on what's happening in this field, And the way we try to represent it is with things like crop models. So crop models are essentially virtual versions of a plant that are grown on a day-to-day basis within a, in a every day the plant is exposed to the weather and develops a little bit according to the genetic, according to the overall growth stages of the plant. So there's lots of things in this chart, but just to emphasize that we're looking above ground and below ground, and we are basing this on fundamental biophysical processes, things like photosynthesis and reproductive stages of a plant. Now this is a crop model, but of course agricultural models are more than just crop production. Also look not just at what was happening in that maize field, what happens when when the harvest occurs and grain is to processing plants and silage and storage and shipped around the world and brought back for global markets with different markets and shopping carts and consumers. This overall pattern of production, value chain, and say what would have happened if we had done something differently, if we had planted in a different way, or if we had used a different seed, or if we had managed the crop in a different way, could we have gotten a different result? So this historical analysis helps us understand. And then of course we can go farther out into the future, and at a certain point we're no longer forecasting because we don't have complete set of information about what might happen in the more distant future. So here we look instead for large scale trends around things like climate change, shifts in the markets, changing policy environments, as well as socioeconomic change and development, and then the larger sense of environmental sustainability. This longer term outlook helps us think about proactive interventions, which allows us to prepare the situation so that those future extremes don't hit us so hard. So all of those different types of applications went into the fundamental design of AgMIP. AgMIP is an international community now numbering over 1,200 experts around the world. We include climate scientists, agronomists and crop modelers, economists, information technology experts, food security experts, and the list goes on. But this community has come together largely in a voluntary basis to address current and future risks to food security so that we can build a more productive, sustainable, and resilient future. Now, on the left, you'll see a complicated list of all of the various AgMIP activities that are underway in some form or another. Most of these activities that you see here represent multiple modeling groups using multiple models to take on a challenge in different environments around the world. You'll see some large-scale organization here. For example, we begin with experiments and field data that allows us to understand fundamental processes like evapotranspiration in different systems. We then build crop models for specific species. For example, our wheat model intercomparison has more than 40 different wheat models that are being intercompared against the same field data. We've done this for many crop species, as you can see. We also take these crop models and we run them not just on an individual point, but we run them on a grid so that we can understand regional and global level challenges. And some of those gridded results feed into economic assessments, first on a regional basis in many different parts of the world, but also on the global level so that we can understand large scale shifts in land use, competition for water resources and energy, as well as the markets and prices and dietary demands of different parts of the world. We also take some of these approaches, and to make it work, we have to develop data and tools that are fundamental to understanding connections between models and how do we translate data from one format to another so that different models can use them. And of course, we're not just looking at yields, we're also looking at interactions with things like water resources, livestock, the overall sustainability of soils, pests and diseases, air pollution and ozone, and interactions between adaptation and mitigation. And the final thing I'll just call out here is that we have many cross-cutting themes. We're always tracking uncertainty. We are trying to figure out at what scale does modeling make the most sense. And then we are going to talk a lot today about these representative agricultural pathways, which I'm trying to point out here. Hopefully you can see. But this is our way of trying to think about what the future might entail for agricultural systems in different parts of the world, so that we can understand not just that the climate is changing, but the climate is changing in the context of many other agricultural changes. So one of the things we try to do within AgMIP is connect agricultural models across disciplines and across scales. So I like to tell this story by thinking back to a farm, and what happens on that farm tends to be just one example of a global network of farms that together make up, huge commodity supplies for the world. That set of commodity production feeds into global markets and are in many cases traded around the world, which in turn sets prices on regional markets. And what's happening in those regional markets, not only for food prices, but also chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides, those things affect what the farmer will choose to do that year and the year that follows. So this connects that circle. And to do that, we have to understand the biophysical side and the economic side. And we have to understand regional and local systems as well as the global interactions. So we are working within AgMIP to build models on each of these scales and to connect them all together so that we can ask big questions around things like climate and development and policy and nutrition. So one of the things we did in our IPCC work was think about the various types of climate change that actually affect things that we care about. You hear oftentimes about climate change. You hear about heat waves, for example, those that are going on in Europe right now. You hear about carbon dioxide levels, but of course, things like cropping systems are affected by many, many different types of climate factors. The average air temperature matters, so does extreme heat. Cold spells and frost can of course also affect agriculture. Many different aspects of the water cycle, including total precipitation, but also things like the intensity of rainfall and different types of drought and even fire weather can affect agriculture. And then there are aspects of wind and storms and snow and ice, as well as coastal flooding and other things that can come into play. So if we want to understand what is happening to crop systems, we have to think beyond the first level questions of climate change and start to understand the extremes and the way that those extremes and even the average conditions interact with cropping systems themselves, in especially paying attention to the fundamental tolerance levels that govern the way that plants operate. So for example, extreme heat becomes especially problematic when it surpasses thresholds that are dangerous for plant development or reproduction. So one of the reasons we are excited about working with crop models is because they allow us to understand some of these key responses and plan resilient strategies in the face of multiple changes at the same time. So of course, when we look at future climate projections, we have to recognize that farmers are not going to sit around and watch the climate ruin their crops and not do anything about it. So we know that there will be adaptation, but we have also seen that adaptation tends to have limited benefits. So this is a diagram from Mark Howden in Australia. And the basic idea is as climate change gets worse, we move to the right on this chart. But as we're doing that, there are adaptation options that come into play. So the adaptation follows this line. And as the climate change occurs, adaptation gives you benefits. That's what this vertical direction means. But as the climate change goes further and further, these types of easy adaptations or adaptations that are accessible and available already, like shifting varieties or your planting time or other kind of on-farm managements, those things have diminishing returns and the benefit starts to weaken and be limited. And at higher levels of climate change, adaptation on these types of actions don't really help you anymore. So in this case, as climate change progresses, a second level of adaptation might be needed, which goes beyond what can happen on just a farm and interacts with things like production chain shifts, the breeding programs, and large-scale risk pooling. Again, you get benefit from this that eventually slows and stalls, which might require an even more transformational set of adaptations around things like land use or new ecosystem service products. So what we're seeing here is a successive set of steps of adaptation that are getting more and more intensive and transformational. And if we can see these climate changes coming, we can anticipate these changes and smooth this curve and make sure that the benefits from adaptation are able to keep up with the climate change themselves. And of course, it's worth noting that it's not just what happens on the farm, but the supply chain and the demand side adaptations are also beneficial. For example, if the dietary demands of the world's population were to shift. All right, so when we're thinking about constructing models for these applications, we take several approaches. First is, again, to remind ourselves that when we look at a field, we are trying to understand what's happening through a variety of different perspectives. So in a current day, we might look at what's happening in a crop field using satellites to look at the weather. For example, we can look at precipitation and other satellite weather products. We also have satellites that look at the vegetation itself, the crop sticking above the ground, as well as looking into at least the surface layers of soil moisture to understand what is happening below ground. We also have the ability to go out and actually directly observe fields. And sometimes we might estimate what's happening simply by looking at the weather anomalies. But crop models give us an additional perspective here, because crop models allow us to estimate what's happening within the plant and below ground. We also can configure these for a variety of management conditions that allow us to be much more precise about what we're understanding, and also allows us to simulate nonlinear effects. And what's exciting about models is they allow us to go beyond this observed experience to understand what a different management condition or a different environment might lead to. So when we're thinking about trying to understand what's happening in a field today, we want to use all of these available tools: direct observation, weather indices, remote sensing, and crop models, because in different locations, different aspects of these observational and modeling systems might tell you important things for your plant's development. Here's an example of some of the crop model results that have been run now utilizing the most high-powered computers at NASA. This is zooming in on the state of Iowa in the United States. And where you see yellow are maize fields, and where you see green are soybean fields. The brighter the color, the more the yield was in that given year. And you can see the years ticking by at the bottom of this chart. This simulation was run on a 30-meter resolution. And as we get closer, you might see that 2012 right here is a very bad year. That was a major drought, which is why the whole screen went a little bit dark. This type of high-performance computer system allows us to think about what is happening, not just in a broad domain, but even on a field and subfield level, so that we can understand the interaction with things like soils and streams and the overall kind of pattern of crop management from year to year and from place to place. So the system is now able to simulate things on very high resolution, which means the bottleneck is now about the data and about the fundamental ability of the model to capture the key responses. One of the things we're trying to do is think about how we might develop crop forecast systems so that we can have early warning and interventions in our crop model in our agricultural system. So this is looking at the US, and this is just a kind of prototype. It's not really operational yet. But the idea here is that we have lots of remote sensing products, we have weather inputs, and we have crop models. At the beginning of the season, we can configure our models by taking things like the soil moisture anomaly and then progressing between the planting date and the date of our forecast using weather data to drive crop models. And maybe along the way, we update with vegetation data so that we can make sure that the model is constrained and arrives at the forecasting day in the best possible representation of what's actually happening in the field. Then we can use multiple crop models with projected or forecasted weather data to give us a variety of forecasts for a given location. And this variety of forecasts becomes information that we can use to develop risk and other kind of interventions, even maybe field intervention of some sort, so that we can plan for the coming year. Now, this approach is very similar to what we do in the weather forecasting community, but has not really been implemented in the agricultural community as of yet. So there's great interest in figuring out how we can configure models so that this type of forecasting system allows us to do what we've done in the weather community for agricultural systems as well. One of the things we've been doing is developing crop models on a global basis, as I mentioned. So here's just an example of the maize production and the wheat production around the world according to an ensemble of crop models from this GGCMI group within AgMIP. This is Global Gridded Crop Model Intercomparison. And I'm going to especially call out the top 20 countries for production of each of these crops, maize production and wheat production. And you'll see Egypt is on both of these lists. Here's Egypt in both situations. What we did with our crop models is we drove them with historical weather data. And what you see here is each row represents a different set of historical climate data that we were testing. But what I'll call your attention to is really the vertical columns. And you can see that we're doing, for maize production, we're doing quite well in the United States. These dark colors and these dots represent statistically significant model representations of the year by year maize anomalies in the United States. Unfortunately, when we get out to Nigeria and Egypt, we're not doing as well, although some of the weather data were able to reproduce what's happening in Egypt. But this is a symptom of us not really having great access and therefore not great understanding of the data in Egypt. And we are very much hoping to catch up in this part of the world to make sure that our products are doing as well in Egypt as they are in other parts of the world. We can take those same gridded crop models and run far out into the future to understand how climate change is affecting various parts of the world. Now, these, I'm going to show an animation here. These are simulations using an ensemble of crop models under a very high emissions scenario of the future. This is an RCP 8.5, or it's SSP 585 for those who know those codes. And what you're seeing is changing maize production and wheat production. And this is a situation where farmers do not adapt. So this is not really a prediction of what will happen as much as an indication that without actions by farmers and agricultural systems managers, things will get dramatically different. So we've now reached the end of the century. And as you can see, the maize yield production has moved into these darker red categories in much of the world, suggesting that maize yield is going to be hit hard by climate change, including in Egypt. Wheat yield production is a much more mixed situation because wheat is a C3 crop, which means it has a stronger photosynthetic pathway response to carbon dioxide and therefore has a larger benefit than maize had. Wheat is also grown in many parts of the world in the cooler seasons, so a little bit more warmth is not as problematic as maize, which is grown in the hottest seasons. But notice even in this wheat yield projection map, while there are green areas, there are also many areas that are red. For example, in Mexico and the southern US, parts of Punjab in Pakistan and India, and parts of the Middle East and Africa. Egypt itself is fairly flat. It's not as strongly impacted as other parts of the world, but it is still a negative impact. Okay. One of the things we've done with these gridded models is we've asked basic agroclimatic sensitivity questions so that we can understand how different parts of the world respond to fundamental changes in temperature and rainfall and carbon dioxide. So here is a map of the way that the world shifts in terms of maize production. And this is a simple sensitivity test where the whole world has gotten 2 degrees warmer every single pixel. And the total rainfall has dropped by 10% in every single pixel. And this is a higher carbon dioxide level environment of 510 ppm. And what you can see is different parts of the world have stronger responses to this set of climate changes. This is something that we call the AgMIP Impacts Explorer, and it's available online. And you can slide these bars and say, you know, what if the temperature were a bigger change, or if the rainfall got much worse, or even got better, or if CO2 levels were much higher. You can see the fundamental responses of each part of the world according to these models. We also, of course, take our results and run them through our economic models so that we can ask questions about prices as well as food security indicators, such as this map, which is looking at the share of the population at risk of hunger under a climate change scenario for 2030. And as you can see here, there are many aspects that are connected to hunger, not just climate change, but there are stark differences from region to region. Now, all of these projections of the future are somewhat daunting, as we would say, or are certainly indicative of a major challenge. But we can also use the models to understand the options for a more resilient food system. So we can look at things like what happens if we introduce biofuels, what happens if we have a different land area for agriculture, or if we expand irrigation. What if we use the blue economy to look at aquaculture and other fisheries to fill in some of the protein demands? There are many options here, and it's important to recognize that this is not a situation where we are looking for one solution to fix all of our problems. But by looking at this variety of solutions and figuring out ways of modeling them, we are able to identify pathways forward. So let's think a little bit more now about zooming in on North Africa and the Middle East. We recently completed a project with NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, looking at precipitation forecasting in Morocco and Lebanon and Jordan. So here's just an example of some crop model results where we set up a high resolution crop model in Morocco for rain-fed wheat and irrigated wheat. And we looked at fundamental responses to temperature and rainfall, for example. But it gives you an idea of our ability to configure models in this part of the world. And this was a short project, but had collaborators at different NASA centers, as well as with the International Water Management Institute, FAO, and USAID. So we're excited about kind of bringing more crop modeling into North Africa. We also did this in Lebanon and Jordan to try to understand what is happening and understand the fundamental responses for wheat in that part of the world. In Egypt, we did a study back in 2018 that was looking at the ability of Egypt to expand agriculture to be food secure into the future. And what we saw was, in this case, the higher carbon dioxide levels, as well as the planned expansion of irrigation, moving into all of these areas surrounded by dashed lines that you see here. These are future regions for wheat in Egypt. That was able to increase total production and keep up with wheat demand out to about the 2040s. But beyond that, the temperature and water resource constraints overwhelmed the expansions of irrigation and CO2, and we started to see shortfalls. So this type of analysis was done with colleagues in Egypt, and we're excited about bringing this type of analysis to the next level. We also want to highlight some work that NASA has been doing on water resources. We have an international water strategy working with partners all around the world to make sure that the best NASA resources for water management are available, of high quality, are making sure that water resources are sustainable, and that we can be resilient in all that we do. So if you're interested in this, we can talk more in the future about how NASA water resources have been working to highlight and address some of these big problems. Just an example of some of that work, this is looking at the Nile River Basin using a set of water models and river routing hydrology models, and trying to understand the difference between the natural riverbed and the kind of managed riverbed with reservoirs and dams and things like that. This is just an example back from 2018 that was presented at the Cairo Water Week. And there's other work now going on looking at the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam to try to understand, what is the impact on the overall system. In terms of approaches that we take when we go to a specific region, we often talk about these regional integrated assessments. The idea behind regional integrated assessments is to create a co-generation process collaborating with local scientists, stakeholders, and policymakers, so that we can represent key agricultural systems and diverse households, and then characterize current agroclimatic risks. We can then explore the present day potential for adaptation and think about pathways for future agricultural development, asking questions around technology, policy, subsidies, or taxes, socioeconomic changes, and land use. These allow us to create and test specific adaptation and mitigation packages so that we can inform national adaptation plans and the nationally determined commitments. We do this with a multi-model climate, crop, and economic assessment that allows us to characterize the different outcomes for diverse populations, even in the same region, so that we can identify and prioritize these specific strategies for development and implementation. We've done this AgMIP regional integrated assessment process in more than 20 countries around the world. The Middle East and North Africa, unfortunately, is one of the places that we have not had as much experience, but feel that there is great potential to follow in the pathways that others have been successful. The overall approach that we do there is we work with a multi-model framework to assess the climate change risks. We map out networks of experts to engage stakeholders. We co-design those pathways to understand what the future might look like. And then we redesign farm systems according to the analyses that we do by evaluating the impact of climate and other changes on ag systems and iterating in this manner so that we can come up with pathways and strategies that are most resilient. One highlight example of what we've done here is I'll draw from our project in Pakistan, where we simulated bread, wheat, and cotton systems and found that in the future, in the 2050s, both bread, wheat, and cotton have reductions in yields. Especially cotton was hit very hard. This leads to substantial decreases in net farm income, but with a set of adaptation packages, we were able to increase farm income from where it would have been without that adaptation by a substantial manner. But even there, we saw that only 58% of the farmers would benefit from adaptation packages that we identified because of these household by household differences in terms of buying power and land tenure and other things like that. Some of this work we're really proud to announce was recently recognized with our co-founder, Dr. Cynthia Rosenzweig, was named the 2022 World Food Prize laureate. And the commendation specifically calls out her work on AgMIP and the work that AgMIP has done around the world. So we're really excited to see this work recognized and want to use the food prize to get more projects so that we can have more countries working on these important challenges. All right, so what does that actually mean in terms of what an AgMIP Middle East and North Africa hub might look like? The first thing to say here is that these are complex challenges. As Dr. Mohammed mentioned, there are really tricky and difficult challenges around climate change itself, in addition to running agricultural models and addressing the impact side. So we recognize this. When there's a new student or a new project who wants to take on one of these challenges, there's a steep learning curve. They're often asked to learn one or more crop models, to identify a large set of configuration data sets around crop genetics and management, to choose and process input data sets around things like soils and weather, as well as to somehow access and develop the skills required to run supercomputer simulations. And then, of course, to get those outputs out to the downstream model users and stakeholders. This is, in many cases, too much for one person to do or one even small project to do, which is why we think there's a huge need for an organizational approach that connects different experts who have expertise in different elements of the system so that they can collaboratively work on these big challenges. So we think that there is a great opportunity for the ag modelers to follow in the footsteps of the weather community by first establishing a framework for models over North Africa and the Middle East. This would mean we'd have to figure out how to identify the right historical input data sets, to have trusted configuration information based maybe on experimental farms. We would want to set up a situation where we had multiple models so that we could understand the strengths and weaknesses of each model itself, and then use common input and output formats so that these data sets and models can actually interact with each other. There's the potential to use expanded data assimilation and model output statistics, which is another way of me saying that we can combine remote sensing information and multiple models into products that are even more powerful than any single one itself. If we can do this, we can look at historical analyses, we can look at near real-time monitoring and seasonal forecasting of ag systems. We can ask questions about present-day risk management as well as future risk management and adaptation and mitigation. And this brings us to questions not just about agriculture, but also about water, energy, land, and carbon resources. Of course, these last three bullets are what you might call climate-smart agroecosystems. And we think that agricultural models could be a fundamental tool to those approaches. So we've been talking for several years now with potential partners in the Middle East and North Africa about maybe developing an AgMIP hub in this region. And what we're looking for now is leadership. I think CCIC is a strong candidate for to be a major part of what we might build. Egypt is also perfectly located in the middle of the North Africa, Middle East region. We've also talked with Mohammed VI Polytechnic Institute in Morocco, as well as ICARDA with connections in France. IMI, FAO, and NASA and Columbia University are all interested in this type of partnership. We've also expect that there would be more interest from groups like CIRAD, the United Arab Emirates, who are hosting the next COP meeting, and the US State Department with their Aim for Climate initiative, as well as bringing in things like water resource groups, and partners in the public and private sector. We want to do the types of things that we were just describing, which is one of these AgMIP regional integrated assessments that would help us follow this pathway and allow us to iterate in a co-design and co-engagement process so that we can design adaptations and assess impacts out into the future. As was already mentioned, this is the type of work that could help us develop products and community efforts that we could show at COP27 and COP28, which are both being held in this domain in the next 2 years, and that there are concrete initial steps that we might take. We just heard from Chuck that this exchange with the AgMIP community seems to have the green light, and we'll be moving forward. And we're looking forward to climate, crop, economics, and food security experts visiting the USA to learn more about AgMIP protocol approaches from AgMIP experts. We would like that to also be partnered with a workshop in the MENA region so that we could engage not just with the scientific experts, but with the policymakers and stakeholders, as well as with each other across the international borders, so that we can organize the community and establish plans for initial demonstration applications in different parts of the region. So to summarize here, and with thanks for your patience in this long talk, agricultural modeling provides key insights and high potential for application from present-day risk management all the way out to future resilience planning. AgMIP and its international partners are working right now to provide protocol-based approaches so that we can address this intersection of complex challenges for the food system. But we've seen that multi-model and protocol-based approaches are really important to getting robust science in front of the policy-making process. There is a great potential to build agricultural modeling efforts in North Africa and the Middle East, and we feel that the establishment of an AgMIP MENA hub could build a community of practice and application in the run-up to COP27 and COP28. So thank you very much for your attention. I have my email contact here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alex, for this amazing presentation. I think we can start from Dr. Anjuli.
Thank you so much, Alex, for your great talk. Yes, I put my questions in the chat for Alex. Alex, first of all, I was thinking about how we can begin here by what kind of historical observations. You know, we have the remote sensing data to give us a global idea and even a large regional footprint. But just on the basis of what others in the region are doing, what kind of historical observations should they be in the, maybe you'll say both, should they be in the agricultural sector as well as in the meteorological thing? So what kind of historical observations should we focus on first? Mm-hmm. And my second question had to do with the computing. I believe that to get the model to reproduce with fidelity, you know, a particular region, let's say this region, you need to actually do a lot of hindcast simulations. And so I was wondering whether some of the other countries that are participating in the AgMIP are they using cloud computing resources at all? Did you have an idea for that, just in terms of, again, future strategy for the region here? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, great questions. You know, the international weather community in many ways is more organized than the international ag science community. So we could find weather data to run crop models, but that doesn't mean it's good weather data. But every part of the world we can find, you know, the variables that we need. But we have found again and again that the real key quality comes when we have a blend between the global products and the local weather experts themselves. The local Met agencies with access to their weather stations is really the gold standard of what we can do. But I think the real bottleneck, the real challenge is that, you know, if we were to try to set up a crop model in a new region, we have to start by asking what crop data are out there. That is the real challenge. Sometimes you'll find very high quality experiment data, but it is on a farm that does not really represent what a typical farmer is doing. It might be a very high input, you know, experimental technology farm that does not match the typical community farm. So understanding information about, you know, planting dates, the type of seeds that are grown, the rotations of crops, the fertilizers that are used, that type of information is really important for us to set up a model that we can trust. And in many cases, that information is known. It is just not collected and organized in a way that allows crop modelers to easily run it. So whenever we go to a new region, we connect with the ag ministry to try to identify what data are out there. But there is nothing better than a local agricultural expert to make sense of those data and connect those into the crop models. In terms of your second question, the hindcast simulations, those are of course very important. Anytime you're doing a forecast, you have to prove it with a hindcast set of simulations that show that you have skill. As I mentioned, we have many prototypes on this, but nothing quite operational yet. We use the NASA supercomputer resources to do some of these simulations. That's quite powerful, but of course has access problems in terms of different parts of the world running that. So there is certainly an interest in developing common high performance computing resources, and groups like, you know, Google and Amazon may be interested in this, but it is going to require a concerted effort. And here again is a reason why a community approach, an organizational cross-boundary collaborative approach is more likely to attract that type of resource. And then also to be able to defend the models that come out so that both sides benefit.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alex. I think we have Yasmin. Hisham, can you please go ahead and open your mic?
Yes, can do. Thanks, Dr. Alex, for your presentation. Really very informative for us. Yes, I have just a few comments. One related to the uncertainty. How do you quantify and deal with the uncertainty, especially for the climate change simulations, let's say. Also, for climate change simulation, is it dependent mainly on the SSP scenarios that include currently the socioeconomic, or your models include this impact somehow in a different way? Last comment is related to the confidence. Now we read in the IPCC report, the latest versions, they speak about the confidence also of the result. And yeah, my question also related to this confidence, is it how you represent in your simulation? Is it still related to uncertainty or no? I don't want to say too much, but just I wanted to highlight, because also I'm interested with the uncertainty, because you know, in reanalysis and even the models now in Africa, the uncertainty due to limitation of the simulated data is really challenging to find. So if you
yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, those are great questions. So yeah, uncertainty is you know, prevalent in everything that we do. It's a very important part of our approach. The whole idea of running multiple crop models was not really common before AgMap. But we've seen in the climate community that you need multiple climate models to make sense of the future, because every model adds some utility, but also introduces uncertainties and biases. And what we've seen is the same thing in the crop modeling community, that one crop model can give you insight, but multiple crop models can help you separate the common signal from maybe the noise of biases and errors that might exist in one model or another. So part of our whole approach is to set up a situation where we can run multiple climate models under multiple scenarios with multiple crop models, so that we can understand the uncertainty in various aspects of that. And we actually published a paper that I led for the 1.5 degree report, where we looked at the uncertainty that came from climate, the uncertainty that came from the socioeconomic scenarios, the uncertainty that came from the crop models, and from the economic models. And we actually found that the economic models were the biggest source of uncertainty, followed by the crop models, followed by the climate models. And part of the reason for that is that there are big challenges around things like the carbon dioxide response and the interaction between heat and drought and CO2. So understanding that is part of what we're trying to do. So when we present our results, we are trying very hard to avoid situations where we say you have one answer. It's going to need uncertainty bars. And as we're thinking about the confidence of this information, it's more than just a quantitative confidence. This is where the expert judgment also comes in, which is, do we trust these models? Do we understand why we're getting differences? If we get very consistent results, but seem to be missing a fundamental response, we can't say that it's high confidence just because our error, our range of differences is small. So within the IPCC, we emphasize an approach of multiple lines of evidence. So do we see the response in observations? Do we understand physically how the response occurs? And do we see that response in the projections? That, if all three of those things are true, we usually have more confidence over what's happening. And where we don't see all three of those things, we need to talk about what is missing in our degree of confidence. Lastly, I wanted to address your question about the socioeconomic side. We are very interested in the socioeconomics because that is a very important part of shaping the future for the agricultural sector and other sectors. I was just participating in a scenarios conference where we're trying to figure out what the next round of shared socioeconomic pathways, the SSPs, might look like. We were emphasizing at that conference that we can't just talk about global levels and global populations and economics. We have to think about regional, and we have to think about sectoral differences. So we need scenarios around whether Egypt will have more or less agricultural land, whether there will be massive irrigation projects or not, whether there will be shifts in mechanical equipment or subsidies for fertilizers. All of those things are important to understand the future, and we can't really guess those things. We need a process, and this is part of the AgMap process, is to work with stakeholders and policymakers to envision different potential futures for the agricultural sector, so that we can evaluate climate change in those contexts and understand, the various degrees of uncertainty related to those.
Thank you very much. Based on your expertise, if I may do practical question related to this. Because you mentioned for the uncertainty to work with a multi-model, which is, of course, I understand this point of view. And when I try, because, when I try, I have sometimes, not consistent results. And when I do in this way to take the example of the consistent result together. For example, if in seasonal forecast to have an example, I choose the models that agree in anomaly signal. And the same also for the crop model, because sometimes the sensitivity of the models differ, which give different results. So if I do the example, is it correct way is it a correct approach, or do you, or just I take simply the multimodal mean, no matter the differences in signal?
Yeah, so it depends very much on the situation. So I don't want to give a universal answer, but I would say that there are approaches that you can take to select models that are more or less appropriate for your situation. So even as recently as a couple years ago, the idea often was put forward of, if you start to eliminate climate models and say this one is not realistic, you can eventually find something about every climate model that would make you eliminate it. And it might be easier just to take all the climate models, call that the climate uncertainty, and go forward. That has changed. There is now strong pushes to say that there are certain climate models that have key attributes and key characteristics that make them more appropriate. In particular, people are looking at the transient climate response and the equilibrium climate sensitivity to ask questions about the most sensitive models and whether they are realistic. From a crop modeling perspective, we have to be very cautious. If we see all of the models agreeing, but missing a fundamental response, we have to be careful about that. And sometimes it's an outlier model that captures that response that might actually be more accurate, even though it appears to be an outlier. So I would say that we need to come up with some approaches that help us identify which questions are fundamental or which characteristics are fundamental to the process that we're exploring. And if we do that, we can ask, whether we want to eliminate or choose a subset of models. Now, I also just want to say one more thing. I'm going to paste a couple of papers that I worked on that might also shed light on this. But one of the other challenges that I haven't said as much on is the data uncertainty. The data itself, can have big problems and differences. So we did a study that looked at the difference between multiple weather data sets and asked whether they were closer to each other than they were, or let me put it another way, was the differences between the climate data set larger than the differences typical from year to year in rainfall or in temperature. So if the year by year differences were much bigger than the differences between the model or between the data sets, you could probably take any of those data sets. But if the difference between the data set was much larger than the difference from year to year, then the selection of your data set would really matter for the uncertainty of what you're projecting. So I'm sure I haven't explained that as well as I could, but I'll paste a reference in and you can see what that might look like.
Thank you so much again. Moving to you, Dr. Ala, if you have any question.
Yes, thanks, Alex, for your presentation. My question about which crop model do you think it's better to use in the model? We have many crop model like DSAT, CropSys, WOFEST. Which one do you prefer to use in the future under climate change?
Yeah, that's a tough question. The short answer from an AgNet perspective is all of them rather than one of them. What we found is when you have, I mentioned we had 40 different wheat models. What we found is that if you can pick, 2 models is dramatically better than 1. 3 models is better than 2. 4 models is better than 3. But once you get to about 5 models, adding another model doesn't help that much. Now that's a difficult task, as I mentioned, in this steep learning curve. To ask one person to learn one model is difficult enough, let alone 2, 3, 4, and 5. So either you need collaborators who each understand their own model, or we have to be a little bit more realistic about what we're asking. So I personally use DSAT, and that's the model that I was trained in and I've spent most of my time working on. That doesn't necessarily mean I think it's the best. And unfortunately, that's the truth, which is that people often use the model that they learned. And at a certain point, we need to figure out if the results are owing to, the selection of the model or the history of where the person was trained, or what came about that. Within AgMIP, we've done probably the most work with DSAT, with LPJML on a global level, with AppSim, and many more. But like I said, there's 40 or more models to choose from. And what we found often is that if you go to one location, there will be a best model. It's not always the one you'd think. So APSIM was developed in Australia, but does not necessarily mean that APSIM is the best model for Australia. And STIX was developed in France, but does not necessarily perform the best in France. What we find is in different parts of the world, different models are the best, and it's not always the same one. So what does seem to always be the best, if you look across multiple places and say, you know, if I have a network of 10 diverse sites, which model will perform the best across all 10? That is the model ensemble. So a 2 or 3 model ensemble will almost always outperform the individual models when you go across multiple sites, which is why when we're setting up our grids, we're trying to do a multi-model approach. So I'm not sure I've answered your question other than to say that within AgMIP, you can connect to multiple models and see for yourself which ones perform best under different circumstances.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Dr. Alex. Can you please share the reference of the paper that you shown in your slide on maize production?
Sure. The Egypt one or the global one?
Which one would you like to have, Dr. Yasmin?
I'll put them both.
Great,
the
thank
one
you.
that you showed, yeah, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to place here. This is the global one, and then you know what I should do before I get too far. This website here has all my references, so you can find a lot there. And then the Egypt one, let me find. It's this one, and then I promised one more on the uncertainty across data sets, which I will find right now. Let's see. Yes, okay. All right, so anyway, I put a bunch of references. Hopefully people can take some of them.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for all of your efforts, Dr. Alex. I don't know if anyone else has anything to say or to ask about. We have Dr. Alex with us now. It will be better to speak now.
So maybe I will pose a question, which is, you know, I put some ambitious calls for potential community efforts. I'm curious if there's interest in that from CCIC or from others in terms of, you know, partnering. We have found that you know, the group that is the hub, the kind of leading group has a very strong and prominent role and can very quickly elevate the institution to a high level. First and foremost in organizing within the country itself, because it's rarely one institution per country. You have to interact across multiple. But then also building those international partnerships within the region can be quite powerful. So if there's interest in that, I really would love to learn more and see if we can arrange a phone call or a workshop of some sort to progress that forward.
Dr. Muhammad, do you want to talk about that? Or I can connect you with Alex after this meeting if you want. Dr. Muhammad Fahim?
Yes, Ala, I was going to say that after the group attendees have heard Alex's talk, we can certainly see in the next week or two what is the reaction, and if there is a critical mass of scientists who are interested in pursuing what Alex suggested, then we can reach out to Alex and have a telephone call. Luckily these days, except for Alex, he has to get up early in the morning given the 6-hour difference, but we can have a Zoom call with a smaller group of people if there is sufficient interest. How does that sound?
Yes, I think this is a great idea. Yes.
Sounds good.
This will work. Yeah.
I just wonder if you, Dr. Alex, don't mind to share the slides with us.
I'd be happy to share the slides. Yes, the movies that I showed, the Iowa movie and the global projections, those are very big. So I may share just a screenshot and then point you to a web location where those exist. But yes, I'd be happy to share.
Thank you.
And I think we have recorded the talk, so we will be happy to make that available as well. So then you can hear it again and with the other slides, etc. So we will have the recording hopefully.
Yes, that's
And I
correct.
would also like to thank you, Alex, for joining us today. I'm really grateful to you for sharing both your time and expertise with the larger group. Over to
Yeah,
you,
my
Alex.
pleasure.
Thank you so much. To be honest, it was a great honor to have you with us today. And I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for waking up that early. And I want to thank everyone who joined with us today, this session. I hope it was helpful and fruitful to you all. And I will share the recording soon. Hopefully it will contain translation in Arabic. And for any question, I will share with you the email of Dr. Alex. If you need anything from him, you can directly send him an email. Thank you so much, Dr. Alex. And thank you so much, Dr. Anjali and Dr. Muhammad Fahim, for your time today. See you next week, inshallah, in our next session. And have a nice rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.